So I think this is a very interesting kind of calculation that's going on because, interestingly, Hezbollah did not enter into this in the first 3 days in any meaningful way. And I think that was a huge point because in those 3 days, not only did we raise an army of 360,000, but also evacuated all of those villages in a perimeter that is going to be most affected. I'm sorry, and it had given Israel kind of a breathing point. So no element of surprise for Iran and Hezbollah with that because they were not in tandem with Hamas. That's one thing to keep an eye on. The second thing is, I think they were very surprised by the very prompt arrival of the USS Gerald Ford with the kind of firepower that it brings with it. It's not just the carrier. As you know, there are many other surrounding vessels. And so that's a new kind of calculation because the operations that Hezbollah has in mind is a certain number of rockets and abilities to affect the Israeli home front from afar while absorbing an attack from the Israeli Air Force and Israeli forces. Well, that force just doubled. And I don't think that was in their calculus. And the third thing, and I think it's very important to pay attention to that, is President Biden's arrival in Israel lifted this country off of the floor where it was and had brought back an amazing fighting spirit and hope for what is coming next, and that Israel does not stand alone in this. So all of these things complicate the situation. And mind you, Hezbollah is in a very difficult situation inside Lebanon in terms of legitimacy, and we're hearing that everywhere. So we're seeing somewhat of a set of deterrent options. But having said that, war is war, and it has its own dynamics, and anything can escalate. And Iran, as I mentioned before, stands to lose a very strategic asset, Hamas. And a reason that I say that, and I insist on saying that, you talked about 9/11 and so on, and we can agree that there may have been mistakes in the targets chosen after 9/11. I mean, Afghanistan and Iraq, where is Al-Qaeda? Where is ISIS? There are certain things that we have to deal with. They will make the region better and they will make the world better. And the last point is, this isn't about Israeli anger. I hear this all the time. This is about survival. The sense of security of the people of Israel has been shattered. This is a nation of Holocaust survivors. And that is what we're talking about. This is about security, not about revenge.
Okay, I want Marc to come in on that. And Marc, there have been heartbreaking images today of an empty dinner table actually set for the 200 hostages, a Shabbat dinner. Can we bring up those images? I really do think that they're worth looking at. And this was just heartbreaking to actually see these images. I've been meeting with some of these families. They've been sitting on the pavement and demonstrating. They want their loved ones to come back home. And we forget that there are individual human tragedies at the epicenter of every war. Again, I do know that there is great suffering taking place in Gaza as well. But one of the things you'll hear Israelis say is that you cannot draw moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas. We are not equal. We are responding to a terror attack. You heard Helit saying we are responding because we need to survive. And those posters there saying pain on the wall, those are families of hostages. Marc, go ahead.
Yeah, so I live in New York City where we have a very large Jewish population, and many of my friends are hurting right now as well. And we have seen the crimes that Hamas committed. I mean, there's no doubt that all of those dead Israelis, but also those that have been captured, these are obvious war crimes. But it's time to bring those people back. It's time to negotiate and get them back. And looking at the points that you were just making, Barkha, about how this conflict may expand. Just yesterday, an American destroyer in the Red Sea destroyed a rocket that was fired at Israel. We have the potential for Lebanon. I was in Lebanon during the war in 2008, from Beirut to Sur and Marjayoun down to the Israeli border, and I saw how that affected the region as well. And then, of course, we've spoken about Iran. The potential for this to grow into more than a regional conflict is shocking. And so that's why I think it's so important that, yes, we bring home those people who have been kidnapped by Hamas, but we also look to cool things down and move to a negotiated settlement as quickly as possible.
Let me bring in Noga. Do you think there's space for that? Do you think anyone in Israel would be willing and I hear Marc, I hear Ambassador Sinha, that when Helit says it's about the security of Israel, the point they're actually making is you might be making the region and yourself more insecure. But is anyone willing to hear that at this point? Noga? Noga, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
I heard. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think that if any one of these factors we're talking about, if anyone offered Israel a way to eliminate Hamas from its border and eliminate Hamas as a force for terror that can threaten Israel, I think Israel would do without a war. I don't think the war is the aim here. I think the aim is to eradicate this group. I want to just add something. We were comparing different terror attacks before. I think it might be helpful to understand the magnitude of the challenge that this Israeli government faces right now, to say that Israel's a very small country, less than just about 10 million in population. If we compare it with India, we're talking about a single terror attack that would have killed 140,000 Indians in one swoop. That's the magnitude of this. And as a result, I don't think Israel, for its own security and for its own legitimacy, can get away without acting against Hamas. So, for example, if Qatar were helpful, or if other countries, maybe Egypt, I don't know, were helpful in offering Israel a way to take Hamas away from this earth, I don't think a war would be inevitable in that sense.
I think that's a very fair argument. Before I give the last word to Ambassador Sinha on that, Myra, you said there are no good options. And Noga said, let's say, hypothetically, I don't see it happening. But if Qatar were to step in and say, okay, we are containing Hamas and we are taking that guarantee. We are returning the hostages. Here they are, 200 of them. And we are containing this. Israel's purpose is not war. I think that's the point that Helit and Noga are making. The purpose is not war. The purpose is dismantling Hamas. Until the world can address that question, you cannot, they would say, as Marc is saying, or Ambassador Sinha is saying, convince them of a ceasefire or a cessation of sort of holding their fire, cessation of hostilities. Myra?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, I obviously I always favor diplomacy, and most sensible people would diplomacy over war. But I'm looking at it right now. I think that is something that's going to have to run in parallel. The war in Gaza will continue, and other countries, whoever has the ability to intercede, will have to be doing whatever they can behind the scenes to try and dial down the tensions.
Ambassador Sinha, is there space for that? You have Sunak meeting with, the Saudis. You had Jordan and Egypt cancel on President Biden at a time when it was believed that Israeli strikes were responsible for the Gaza hospital bombing, which investigators like Marc believe is not the case. But the Arab street is angry. And at this moment, I don't know who can dial this down, but I also hear Helit and Noga saying the purpose is not war. The purpose is ending Hamas. We've dealt with this, Lashkar, Jaish, we've gone through this in our own country. I get it, how many Indians have been enraged by similar terror attacks. Last word to you.
Well, I agree that the region where Israel is located is a very difficult region, and the space that we are talking about for resolving these issues through a political process is very small. In fact, at the moment, it's non-existent. But we have to continue efforts to create that space, because war will not solve the issue. It may just buy peace for some time for Israel. Now, that may seem an attractive proposition in the current situation. But if we are looking at a long-term solution to this problem, then there has to be a political process. And the fact that President Biden came in, reassured Israel, both in military terms and in political terms of support, and the fact that countries like India have come out very clearly in support of Israel, shows that there is a lot of international sympathy for Israel at the moment. And this is perhaps the time for Israel to try and create that space and see if a political process can be started, so that the hostages can be got back safely. And then the way to destroy Hamas would be by removing that moral claim, that self-righteous claim that Hamas is claiming